I hope everybody enjoys the stories today. We're kind of taking a different direction, kind of seeked out, and we're going to be reading some different type of material today, which is fantastic. But I just want to say that I appreciate all the love and support as always, and the amount of support and everything that we've been receiving is absolutely ecstatic. And I will forever be grateful. And remember, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for you. I moved there my junior year of high school. My family's house was built from the ground up on the south side of the lake. My parents did not know that this was the other side of the lake that most people avoided. I do not mean to be offensive, but most of the people I knew lived on the north side. I never understood why until the event started happening. The house was finished, the summer going into my junior year. When we officially moved in, things were great. A few months into me beginning school is when things turned incredibly dark. It all began when my dad put his guitar in our family room by the fireplace. I would come home and something would string the guitar string so violently, it sounded as if someone knocked it over. I began waking up to my dad being completely weirded out because all of our cabinets and doors on the first floor would be open. It escalated drastically from here. We would hear something in the woods just outside of the porch lights continually. First, we thought it was an injured animal, but dead deer and other wildlife would appear on our property every few weeks. Then we began seeing inhuman things. Guests would see something walking in the hallways, opening drawers, and would see a girl in our guest house. My dad constantly was hosting events and parties, including his ex-military friends. They would ask us why we were coming to their rooms at night and opening the drawers and closets and then walking out. My dad didn't believe me until his friends began commenting on figures and people in the house. The worst night was when all the doors began opening and slamming, as if it sounded like someone was walking up and down stairs and going into every room, opening and closing the doors. I could go on and on about the things I saw in that house. It was one of the scariest times of my life. I am happy to answer any questions. All in all, do not go to Canyon Lake. I live with my husband and two teens in a cul-de-sac that borders woods. We all love spending time in our yard and enjoying nature. On two occasions, my kids have told me about some eerie experiences they've had. My kids recently got a trampoline and love to be on it, even at night. Recently, they heard whistling and conversations from the woods around 10 p.m. Now I can assure you, nobody goes down there, except in hunting season. This really freaked them out and they came in and told me right away. I should mention we have a cat that escapes sometimes and we end up in the yard looking and calling her name. Another time, my son was out around dusk looking for the cat near the border of the woods. He was by himself and his sister was inside. He said he heard his sister calling his name from the woods twice and then giggling. This was very unsettling to say the least. I want to install cameras for the yard. Not sure what's going on. Does anyone have any sort of ideas? I am from Rhode Island, and my friend and I have always had an interest in paranormal hotspots around the state. In a town called Cumberland, there is a haunted road called Tower Hill Road. There's a lot of paranormal stories and history of the area. According to the people who live around, they see the ghosts of a little child walking a dog. There were also stories about Native Americans who were killed during the French-Indian War. So, one day, we decided to drive over there and look around. There's been a few places that I've been to where I could literally feel the heaviness. I felt really anxious for some reason, and there were times where I felt I would see shadows in the distance. When we passed this specific tree, my friend started screaming that she saw something. I started laughing because I was nervous, but then my whole body felt like lead, and my fight or flight instincts were screaming at me. For the rest of the drive, I felt this kind of paranoia, like someone was watching us. The road is about a mile long, but it feels like it is so much longer. If anyone here is from Rhode Island or the New England area and want to explore paranormal areas, I really recommend this one. Alright, this all happened about a year or two ago when I was asked to watch a neighbor's dog for a bit while they went on vacation. For context, I live in a super heavily forested rural community. Neighbors asked that I stay at their house while watching their dog, Cyclone, and I happily oblige. I'm taking Cy on his usual route along some local hiking trails that connect to the neighborhood that are often tracked during the summer. But this was late fall, so they were deserted in anticipation of the snow. Of course, it's sunset, and I'm just trying to get Cy to pee so we can head back inside. I let him off leash to do his thing, but he has other plans. Cy takes off into the woods, and I wait for him to come back for about 5 minutes before following him. I'm calling his name and following his trail when I come up behind him. About 100 yards off the trail, he's chewing on a stick, and my patience for the night is gone, so I walk over to clip on his leash again and take him home. Turns out it wasn't a stick, it was a bone. A large bone. It likely was a leg of some animal. I freeze, as the bears have already hibernated and there are only 2 coyotes in the area. I take a closer look and see a paw still attached to the bone and lose it. I grab Cy and book it back to the house. The next morning I go out with Cy again, still freaked out but determined to figure out whose dog had been snatched by apparently something. It was a deer leg, and half the body was right around the corner. It had clearly died of natural causes, and I was clearly an idiot for getting so scared last night. So, this happened back in 2006 or 2007. Me and my family went to a park. We were going there for probably 20 years. It's quite a big one too. But still, one day, we came across a part of it where the meadows usually continued, yet, all of a sudden, a part of the forest wasn't there. We were at first wondering what happened, then shrugged it off and went down, going towards it, then went inside of it. It was pretty dark in there, for being an afternoon in autumn and kinda weird. There was almost no wind. It was silent. There was a part where the light came through, a bit dim, yet kinda open. I looked around and the ground was black, the soil, and it was all just so surreal. Between most of the tree roots were old crimson red bricks. They all looked pretty weathered. The forest was, at least from the looks, 100 years old, if not older. Well, and now we come to the rather more uncanny part. We were standing around, looking around, wondering why we never saw this forest, which wasn't too big either. Then it got strange. Pretty dim, almost no wind, and stuffy. It was like something was in the air, giving all of us goosebumps. And I heard a voice which told me to leave, to get out. Now. I told them, and we went out of there as soon as possible. The next time we came to this place was probably months later. The power lines before the start, next to the road, were still there, but the forest, it was gone. Like it was never there in the first place. The grass looked like the rest of the meadows, like it truly was never there in the first place. To this day, me and my family wonder what happened on this day. It all kind of starts like this. As far as I can remember, a cold winter day, and I was walking through the woods near my house, which is just at the edge of town. As I walked around, I noticed that the leaves weren't covering the ground in this area. Not a lot of snow has fallen around there. After a bit of walking, I saw him, just looking at me. He was slightly crouched, kind of like he was looking out for someone else. His body was black, more of a dark gray. He had a deer's skull as a face, with long antlers. Something was on a side on one of them, a string, a few feathers attached to it. The skull was covered with what looked like dried blood, dust, a bit of dirt, and some mud spots. His hands were humanoid, with claws, same color as his skin. It just looked at him, being somewhat tense, not in fear, but more like when you're about to snap and punch the living shit out of someone, glaring daggers at him. I remember that something was wrong with my own eyes. They were glowing, which I had a few times before in other dreams and astral travel. A combination out of deep, dark red flames, mixed with yellow and some green, similar to copper under an open flame. I stared at him, into his dead, milky white eyes, standing there for a moment, staring at him as he stared back at me, like a deer, caught in the headlights of an oncoming car in the dark night. Yet, all of that in the open daylight. Not sure if morning or around noon, after staring for a moment at him and walking closer, I spoke up, saying only, "Hey, what's up?" Saying that in a rather cocky and sarcastic way, with some anger in my tone. He stared at me, shifting a bit to his side, only responding with, "What?" He started to panic, turned around and started to run away, while I was just standing there, perplexed and wondering, seeing him disappear into the rest of the deeper parts of the woods. I was being frustrated at this moment, since I only wanted to know what he was doing in my forest. While looking down, I noticed something strange. I was wearing my old army jacket, jeans, and combat boots, which were all in black. Yet, my hands, they were humanoid, but black, and somewhat like from a wolf. My eyes were still glowing, and I was just standing there, wondering who or what I really was. Who could even spook? What later turned out to be the Windigo, like the devil himself, appeared to him. on that day in the forest. At least the end of what that dream, or rather astral travel part was, which I had some similar ones before with other beings. I'll be talking from this point out about some very strange details, which are going to make all of this way more uncanny and surreal than just some weird dream. I remember the night before. It was quite cold outside, yet no snow. Yet, something was off. There was a stench coming from the forest, further down the hill. The smell of a rotting corpse, maybe a deer, who knows. The night was clear, the forest almost soundless. No wind was blowing, and this smell wasn't there days before, nor the next coming days. A couple weeks later, I was bored, being on my phone, remembering this strange encounter. I then used the compass app on my iPhone, from the position where I was sitting in my home office, looking into the direction in the woods where I met the Windigo. The degree number made a chill run down my spine. It was 0 degrees north on the spot. Another thing is, I heard about the Windigo once, a while before I had this encounter. Just some very brief and rough description. Almost no details. Just some deer-like creature which walked up on his rear legs with milky eyes. After I've done some research, I found out it wasn't just a Windigo. It was that one. The weird one with the feathers. Almost the same as in my dream. Besides that, the also strange thing is, I don't even live in the location for sightings of Wendigos, skinwalkers, and such creatures. I'm living here for almost a decade. Moved back in 2013, and I've heard some strange things from the forest. The house is on the side of the hill, next to the forest, pretty much last the house before the thick forest starts. Further down is a small valley with a pond, or rather, a small swamp. I've spotted a lot of deer, even boars down there. My dog noticed those too, but they often bark down there. Just no good reason. While there's no sounds to hear from the forest. Yes, I've read similar stories over here, and with the forest, it goes quiet, just like it does in the dream itself. It is like someone pressing the mute button, and there's beggings for sounds of silence. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can be almost deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world, but not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the doors behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me, that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was just something rabid that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the night, right there where it was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, "Whoever that was is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that this maybe was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me go back inside to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned and drew my gun again, expecting something right there, but again, there was nothing. A couple weeks later, I was on the porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside and got something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now, at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was really rainy and stormy. This is around 9 p.m. and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me, growing up in Oregon, loved the rain. And for the past 10 years, we lived in Vegas where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching the rain, so for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except, this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there, talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No." "What did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear anything. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I am positive." "How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounded like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now, at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I've been listening intently, and there's absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time, she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas light I know, but what if it is a kid? Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies and we both go inside. I didn't know what it was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to go and investigate. We have 6-year-old twins, and we have the doors set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go inside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her, "What is she doing?" And she just says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out into the woods and says, "See? There it is. There it is again." Again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside of our house is slim and that she needed to get back inside the house. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said, "Well, if that were true, I would hear it as well." Now, at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist and she did. Now, looking back, I feel really bad about knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we are out on the front porch. It's early evening and I had just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows that he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet of our front porch, we have to be careful as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we were talking, we were both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds is all they said was, "How are things?" We said, "Good." And he told us he would stop by later and his wife got something for the kids. And we said, "Okay, great." And he drove off. I looked over where our son was and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up in front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or squirrel or something and wanted to see it close up. I walked him back up to the front of the house and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing is quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house, on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent. The floodlight that's on the side of the house that had clicked off at this point, so I'd walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the backside of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in the area weren't making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So, to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden, the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said okay as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but it's just like this instance every time there's nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house and I was watching a movie with my wife and walked over to me and she said, "Did you call me?" I said no. And she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but then didn't understand it because it sounded so close. And I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table doing something and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony as it has no staircase outside. I would think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property next to the main road. It is kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the downrange, you have woods surrounding you on all sides except back up to my shop. I have to say, it's always felt creepy when I am dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was going to start to fade soon, so I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you have been in Tennessee woods, you will know that a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere. So, this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood. If that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again, couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear, I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running wasn't a great idea. I slowly walked backwards up to the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with a rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this as I didn't want to hear her freak out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store, and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if I had known I could see its eyes and move. The color was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt very ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in the bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night up until this point. I've always been skeptical as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moving quickly on all 4s. Then, when it came out to the clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open and moving quickly as it could still while being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of the car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house. Her disregard to my command annoyed me, but still, I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods, walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned towards it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought she was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now, at this point, she's about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back towards the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face. And she just kept saying nope, over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean, dead?" And she said, "That's where the pupils were, looked gray like the way eyes look when they go blind." She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support. I hope you enjoyed today's stories as much as I did reading them.